Episode 268, Why Autism Parents Don't Just Get a Babysitter. The Truth About Trust. Well, hey, friend, welcome to another episode of the Not Your Average Autism Mom podcast. I am your host, Shannon Urquiola, and I'm so glad that you're here, whether you're listening to me on audio or you're watching me on video. Just glad that you're making time to spend a little time with me today. So, I am mom to an amazing 29-year-old who was diagnosed with autism when he was 5 years old, and I am his guardian and caregiver. And I've spent the last several years coaching and mentoring moms just like you, because I just think that you shouldn't have to figure all of this out on your own. I also know how full your days are. And I want you to know that I don't ever take your time for granted. And that's why I try really hard to keep all of our episodes to 20 minutes or less, quick, real, and practical, because let's just be honest, none of us have a lot of extra time. So before we jump in today, I want to thank our podcast sponsor this week, NeuroFree. And I will share a little bit more about who they are and the work they're doing for families raising children with autism later in this episode. One of the things people say to parents like us raising children on the spectrum is you should really get a babysitter and just take a break. And I'm sure you're shaking your head in agreement, because most of us have certainly heard those words. And listen, I understand why people say that, because when you're raising typical kids, that's exactly what you do, right? You leave a list on the refrigerator. You tell them that bedtime is at 8 and you head out the door. But when your child is autistic, especially if they struggle to communicate, that decision is not that simple. And it's not about the babysitter. It's about something deeper than that. It's about what happens when you're the only one person who truly understands your child and what that responsibility actually feels like. Because when you're raising an autistic child, if they have regulation problems or communication problems, you often become the person who can read signals that nobody else sees. And that creates a kind of responsibility that most parents never really have to think about. So, what do they say? They tell us to leave a list. The list isn't the hard part. We could write pages of instructions, bedtime routines, food preferences, sensory triggers, safety issues. But the problem isn't writing the instructions or the list. The problem is that the list doesn't replace understanding. And that's where things start to look very different for us. There is something that happens over the years when you're raising a child with autism. You start learning your child in a way that is incredibly deep. You notice things other people don't notice. You notice the difference between anxiety or sensory overload or confusion. You can tell when something is off before anyone else sees it. You can hear a tone in their voice and know something's wrong. You can watch, how they move, how they pace, how they stim, how they look at something, and you know immediately what's going on. And the truth is, most people around your child do not have that level of understanding. And not because they don't care, not because they're bad people, but because they haven't lived the thousands of little moments that taught you how to read your child. When you're raising autistic children, you become a translator. Sometimes you're translating their needs. Sometimes you're translating their emotions. And sometimes you're translating their behavior for the world around them. And we as parents become translators of their behaviors and often their communication. Because when a child can speak clearly, if something happens, they can tell you. And this is where communication challenges really change everything for families like ours. Because the reality is that many autistic children struggle to communicate. They struggle to explain experiences. They struggle to describe emotions. They struggle to report if something bad happens. And that creates a level of responsibility that most parents never have to think about. One of the things that people outside of the autism parenting world don't always realize is that communication doesn't always work for the way people expect it to. So, for example, Jordan really, really doesn't like to have conversations. He avoids them whenever he can, unless it's something that he wants to share or he wants to tell you. Otherwise, Jordan is pretty much a yes or no kind of guy. Even with me, even with Dave, even with Maddie, he just doesn't want to have conversations. So, trying to get details about what happened during his day isn't always possible. And I was explaining this to someone just not long ago and said something that made them laugh, but it's actually very true. I said to them, listen, Jordan's day program could literally burn down. The fire trucks could come, emergency personnel could be everywhere taking people away. And he would come home and tell Dave and I, my day was fine. And the person kind of laughed and said, wait, really? And I said, yes, really. Because the reality is, Jordan doesn't always process or communicate experiences the way most people do. So if something stressful happened or confusing happened or overwhelming happened, he is likely not going to be able to explain that to us. He isn't the kind of person who sits down and tells you a detailed story about his day. That's just not how his brain works. So a lot of times, Dave and I are left reading the signals instead. And that means a lot of times we're piecing together what happened. We're watching his mood. We're watching his behavior. We're noticing if he seems more anxious than usual. We're piecing things together. We're asking questions in different ways to try to understand what his day was actually like. We're basically reading between the lines. And many autism parents are doing this detective work every single day. And that's something many autism parents become very good at over time, reading the things that their child doesn't say. And when you live like that, when you're constantly reading between the lines, trust starts to feel very different. This episode is sponsored by NeuroFree, a US based provider offering patented cell infusion therapy designed for children and young adults with autism. Their team begins with consultation and medical review led by a board certified physician to determine if this is appropriate for your child. Their approach focuses on supporting neurological wellness and reducing inflammation in nerve pathways. Every child is unique and outcomes vary. To learn more or schedule a consultation, visit neuro-free.com or call 504-294-8333. And this is exactly why trust becomes such a big deal for autism parents. Because the reality is, when your child cannot fully communicate, you carry the weight of being the person who understands them best. Because when they can't tell you what happened when you weren't there, you become very careful about who and where you leave them. And this is something people outside the autism world often misunderstand. They might think that we're overprotective or controlling, or that we just don't want to leave our kids with anyone. But the truth is much more complicated than that. When your child can't clearly explain what happened when you weren't there, you are left with all of this uncertainty because you know that if something goes wrong, your child might not be able to explain it. And that's a weight that many of us carry very quietly. You know, There's something that happens over time when you're raising autistic children. And the reason trust feels so complicated is because of what we've had to learn over time. We become an expert in them. And I don't mean in a clinical way, I mean in a lived, day in, day out kind of way. After years of parenting your children, you start recognizing things that no one else would even notice. Like with Jordan, there are things that Dave and I can pick up on immediately that someone else would likely completely miss. We know the difference between agitation and anxiety. And that matters because how you respond to those two things is very different. We notice the tiny signals, the things that don't look like much to anyone else, but to us, they mean everything. His tone, the way he holds his hands, the look on his face. Sometimes it's not even something that we can fully explain. It's just a feeling of something's off. And over time, you start trusting that. You start realizing that you can often predict something is wrong before anyone else sees it. You can see a meltdown coming before it actually happens, and you can step in sooner. You can shift the environment. You can help regulate before things escalate. Dave is actually the best at this in our house. He is the one who can redirect Jordan before things escalate. He's way better than me, if I'm being honest. Truth be told, it's likely an inappropriate joke, but my point is that that ability and that kind of understanding only comes from living in it, from being in it every single day, from paying attention to the patterns, the changes, the rhythms of your child. And that level of understanding, that's not something that you can just hand over to someone else, even if you want to. It's built over years. And that's why trust can feel so complicated for us as parents raising children on the spectrum, because it's not about whether someone cares about your child, it's whether they truly understand them. And this just doesn't just show up when someone offers to help. It shows up in your everyday life. This is also why getting a break as an autism parent can be really complicated, because on the outside, it might look like we're just not making the time, like we're turning things down, like we're saying no to opportunities to get out. But there's a lot more going on underneath that. Yes, we are often the ones that are saying no to invitations, leaving events early, rarely taking trips without our children. And it's not because we don't want those things. It's not because we don't need a break. We absolutely do. But here's the part that's hard to explain to someone who hasn't lived it. Sometimes we don't avoid breaks because we don't want to go. We avoid them because the mental load of worrying the entire time just isn't restful. Because if you're out to dinner, but you're checking your phone every few minutes, wondering if everything is okay, replaying in your mind whether, you explain things well enough, thinking, did I forget to mention something that might matter? Or maybe you go out and you're sitting there trying to be present, but your mind keeps going back home. Are they okay? Are they overwhelmed? Do they understand what's happening? Did they go to sleep? And then maybe you cut your night short. Not because anything went wrong, but because you can't even fully relax and enjoy yourself. Or maybe it looks like, getting invited on a weekend trip. And instead of excitement, your first thought is, who would I even leave them with? And before you even finish thinking it through, you've already decided, no, I'm not going. Not because I don't want to go, but because it feels easier than trying to figure everything out. And then there's the guilt that comes with it, wanting time for yourself, but also knowing how much your child depends on you, wanting help, but struggling to find someone that you fully trust. It's a constant push and pull that a lot of us live in. And again, it's not about being overprotective. It's about knowing your child in a way that makes you very aware of what they need and how easily that can be misunderstood. And sometimes the hardest part of this is that even the people closest to you don't always understand it. Even family members may not fully understand what it takes to care for your child. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, people who love your child deeply, but loving them and being able to care for them in the way that they need are two very different things. And sometimes that creates some really hard dynamics because grandparents want to help. They want to be involved. They want to babysit. They want to spend time with their grandchildren. But the reality is, we know, trust me, I know, our kids can be a lot sometimes. Their needs can be intense. Their routines can be very specific. Their regulation can go from good to bad in a minute. And for grandparents, especially older ones, that whole scenario can simply be too much. Not because they don't love them, not because they don't want to help, but because it's genuinely overwhelming. And that can create guilt. You might feel bad saying no. You might feel bad limiting the time they spend together. You might feel bad knowing someone loves your child, but still feeling like they can't manage the responsibility. But sometimes the most loving decision you can make is being honest about what your child actually needs. But every once in a while, something really special happens. Over time, you find someone who understands your child, and it feels like winning the lottery. Maybe it's a therapist. Maybe it's a teacher. Maybe it's someone at their day program. Maybe it's a caregiver who took time to really understand them. And when that happens, it's an incredible gift because that person starts recognizing the signals. They understand the routines. They respect your child's differences. They don't try to force them into expectations that don't fit them. And when you find someone like that, you protect that relationship because trust like that is rare. The truth is that what autism parents need most isn't judgment about why we don't get out more. What we need is patience while we're figuring out who we can trust with the most important person in our life. And if you've experienced that, you know how big that is. One of the things I really want you to take away from today is this. If you sometimes feel like the only person who truly understands your child, you're not imagining that. Many parents become the person who knows their child better than anyone else in the world. You know their sounds, you know their patterns, you know what calms them down, you know what overwhelms them, you know what happiness looks like for them. And while that responsibility can feel like a lot sometimes, I want to remind you that you are the one who understands them in ways the world might not yet understand. And there's another part of this that doesn't get talked about enough, and it's the quiet loneliness that can come with being the only one who understands them. Because while there is something really powerful about knowing your child that deeply, there's also something really isolating about it because you might be surrounded by people who love your child, family, friends, teachers, caregivers, but still feel like you're the only one who truly gets them. You're the one explaining their behaviors. You're the one advocating when something doesn't feel right. You're the one stepping in when others misunderstand. You're the one carrying the mental load of constantly thinking ahead. What might trigger them? What might overwhelm them? What do they need right now? And even when people are supportive, they don't always see what you see. They don't always feel what you feel. And that can feel really lonely sometimes. It's not the kind of loneliness where you're physically alone. It's the kind where you feel like no one else fully understands the weight that you're carrying. And a lot of moms don't say that out loud because you're busy, because you're strong, because you've learned to just handle it. But that feeling is real. And if you've ever felt that way, I want you to know you are not the only one. And I also want you to know that over time, something else starts to happen. You start understanding them in ways that are hard to explain to other people. With Jordan, there are things that Dave and I notice immediately that somebody else would completely miss. It might be the way he walks into the house, the way he puts his books down or unpacks his lunchbox. Or sometimes it's just a feeling. Something just feels different. And we've learned over the years to pay attention to those things because when your child doesn't naturally sit down and tell you what happened during their day, those little signals become incredibly important, right? You start knowing when they're overwhelmed before they even say a word. And that kind of understanding, like I said, it doesn't happen overnight. It happens after years of life together, years of learning, years of watching them navigate a world that isn't always designed for the way their brain works. And not because we're perfect parents, but because we've spent thousands and thousands of moments learning. You become the person who can read what they need when the world around them doesn't see it. And that kind of understanding, it matters more than you probably give yourself credit for. And I think sometimes, we move through our days just doing what needs to be done without ever really stopping to recognize that. But it's exactly what makes you who your child needs. So, listen, if this episode resonated with you, if you've ever felt like you're the only one who truly understands your child, I want you to know I've been there too. There are so many moms walking this same road. And having people around you who understand that experience makes a huge difference. Every week I'm here because I know how hard this journey can be. And I want you to know that you're never walking this road alone. And before I wrap up, I just want to again thank our sponsor for today's episode, NeuroFree, for supporting this podcast and helping us continue to bring these conversations to families raising children with autism. You can click the link in the show notes to get all of the information on the services that they provide. And hey, if you want to go deeper and connect with other amazing moms walking similar paths who just get it, I invite you to check out our private membership where real conversations and coaching and support and understanding are waiting for you. You can get all the details at notyouraverageautismmom.com. The link is in the show notes. And hey, if this episode made you feel a little more equipped to take on the day, I'd love it if you would take a minute and leave a review and share it with another mom who needs to hear it. The more we share these conversations, the more moms we can lift up and help see that happiness is possible on this parenting journey that none of us planned, but we're learning to embrace. Until next week, have a great week ahead. And remember, above all, you, mama, are doing amazing at this mom thing.